Welcome to the Emerson Metal Studio at Craft Alliance in the heart of the Grand Center Entertainment District in St. Louis for today's Inside the Artist Studio program, Ceramics and Metalwork. Hi everybody, I'm Tim Gore and I'm very happy to welcome you to the Craft Alliance Studios where today you're going to have the chance to interact with Hunter Creel, a metalsmith, as he takes you through the process of creating the works of art that he does. To do it, let's go inside the Artist Studio. Hunter, I'll take a minute to say hi. Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I see that you're hammering already. We're going to have the chance to learn a little bit about what it is you do as you create your work, so I'm really glad you've invited us into your studio to make that happen.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys had me.
Don't forget, everybody, if you're joining us from across the country, you can send us your questions via email to live@hec-tv.org. That's live@hec-tv.org. They're going to come to my phone. I look forward to weaving those into the program, as well as the questions we'll get from interactive video conference groups. We've got a question that actually came to us from Durand Middle School right off the bat. I want to go to a Durand Middle School and Alicia, because you've got a question for Hunter about how he got started in all this stuff. So let's do that.
Why is making art important to you, and why do you do it?
So I think that's a nice place to start. Why do you think making art is important, and what got you started? Why do you do it?
Okay. I really think art making is, very important to me because I'm actually able to manipulate a material and create a new object. And I think there's something, really nice about that. I don't think, as a kid, I think you always have that opportunity to be creating, whether it's coloring, drawing, doing things like that. But as I grew older, I got more and more interested in it, and I, was in photography for a while, and I was taking photos and doing some things like that. But in college is when I got really serious about art making.
And what drew you to metal?
What drew me to metal is like I had this ability to manipulate like a physical material, and I had the ability to create a new object, that hasn't been made before, creating something very unique.
And what drew you to copper specifically? There's lots of metals you could work with.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I found myself in like a jewelry specific program, so we were working on such a really, really small scale, and I really enjoyed copper because of its malleability, and which you guys will see here in the next hour that, as you can see, this little thing here, this flat disc of metal, and I'll kind of go along the stages and I can show you what I can do with it. So I can really easily manipulate the material. Well, not easily, it takes a lot of hard work, but...
we're going to have a little bit of hammering as he does it and a little bit of noise. But we're going to begin by talking about malleability and the technique you use called raising to create the shape that you're after, right?
Correct.
So let's go through the raising process, and don't worry, students, we're going to come back to you guys for questions throughout the program. So as you develop questions on the process as Hunter shows it, think about what they are, because I'm going to come to you guys. And don't forget, you can email us at live@hec-tv.org. So let's talk about raising. What's the process?
Sounds good. Let me grab this other stake really quick.
Okay. And this stake is what's going to hold the piece of metal?
Correct. So what I have here, which you guys can see, I have a couple different stakes here. I have many more, but these are the two that we'll be using today. And basically what happens is, let me grab this bigger guy here, is you can really see that I can really transform the metal quite well. And all these little marks are hammer blows, to the metal. So what these stakes are basically tools that I use. These tools completely represent the forms that I can create. So the more forms that I have, available to me, the more unique shapes that I can make.
So obviously then you must have hammered this on a bigger form than
Correct.
This one is?
Yeah, so I have one that I use that's a little bit wider than this. And that's what gave me, this really nice smooth top here. This stake here is really good. It has a little bit of length to it. So when I'm working on something like this, I really kind of have room to be hammering. so I can get inside the vessel a little bit more.
Now, there's a lot of techniques you could use to manipulate the copper, obviously. Why did you choose hammering? Is it a major aggression moment, Hunter?
No, it's funny because when I first started, I thought it was that, and I thought I had to be really aggressive, you know, with the hammer and with the metal. But something you guys will see here in just a moment, when I'm hammering, is it's actually a very kind of delicate process. Yeah, when I get towards the end, I'll be a little more violent with it, you know, and hammering. But you know, to get this really kind of smooth surface on the metal, you really have to be very delicate. You have to use force, but you know, in that. There's kind of a balance. Well,
why don't you show us what you want to do?
Okay, cool.
We can take a moment to let the hammering begin.
Sounds good. Let me put these on. So it'll be a little loud. I'm always wearing ear protection and things like that.
I have my earplugs in.
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start planishing this vessel.
Planishing means what?
Planishing means basically it's the smoothing of metal. So the raising, I guess I can talk about the two different hammers really quick before I get started. So this hammer here is really for kind of pushing the metal. I don't necessarily use this side all that much. This is the end of the hammer I use the most. And this is what kind of pushes the metal forward and starts to bring, you know, the metal around. And this hammer here, you can see it has two different shapes to it. It has a bowed shape here, and then on this end it has a flat end. So this bowed shape I use when I'm in this rougher area, and that's really what consistently kind of, you know, gives the metal a consistent surface. And then once I do that, then I come over with the flat face. And that's what smooths it out.
All right.
So yeah, I guess I can get started.
Go for it. Let's see what happens.
And I'm going to start planishing a little bit.
Okay, I'll back out of your way a little so you can do that.
All right. Put these on. So when I'm planishing, also one thing I have to do is I have to have metal on metal contact. So if this is my stake, it's curved like this, that'll be a better description. My metal has to be directly on that.
Okay.
Because if it's not, if there's a pocket there, it's going to dent and sink the metal in.
You won't get the shape you want.
Yeah, just if I was to, you know, if this was out here and I were to hit it, I would put a dent in it. But if I can keep that metal curve consistent with the curve on the interior, then I can do a really good job of smoothing all that.
Okay.
So, all right, here we go.
And is it basically just that and that over and over and over again?
Yes, there's probably thousands and thousands of hammer blows, because you think also this is the second time I've gone over that surface. So it definitely takes a little bit of work. So I initially have to go over the metal once with my raising hammer, get the metal to move, and then I also have to go over it again with the planishing hammer and knock out all the marks that I just made.
Okay. Okay. Wow.
So I don't know if you guys could see that necessarily, but
I think so.
I can even move it over here a little bit so you guys can
we can get a close-up of that as they see that happen.
Yeah, so you can see here, it's kind of all marred a little bit in this area, and I'll kind of adjust my position here. So, and you can hear that high-pitched ping, and when I'm getting that ping, that means that I'm doing the right thing. I'm smoothing that metal out. If I get like a little thud, I'm not really accomplishing anything.
And Hunter, as you continue to hammer here, we'll send it back up to Durand Middle School in Wisconsin again. Lucas, you've got a question, I think, for Hunter that we can ask as well. Go ahead, Lucas.
What setting are your sculptures used for? Are they functional or decorative?
That's a good question. I definitely think the sculptures that I make aren't functional in a utilitarian purpose. They're not a cup or a bowl that you can use every day. They are decorative in a way. I think they are aesthetically pleasing, to look at, but I also think they are functional in a way that promotes conversation. So I'm always looking for, dialogue with these, and, we can get into that too once we look at the final pieces that I make, and some of the colors that I use on the pieces, and you can kind of see some of the conversations that I like to develop. So.
And you've moved the other stake up here. You're going to begin to work on something differently now?
Yeah, I don't want to bore you guys too much with just planishing. Something like this probably takes me, if I could work physically all the way through, probably, 8 hours here on something this scale. But I'll move on to the next step so you guys can see that next process, in that stage. So.
Great, go right ahead. Let us see that.
Let me move this down just a bit.
And as he gets started here, yes. Oh my gosh, I get to be an assistant. I like it. Magnificat, I'm going to come to you guys in a minute to see if you've got a question just on the process that he's using as he continues to go through it. So be thinking about your question. Go right ahead, Hunter.
All right, so the next step with the raising process is the planishing. I was really working metal to metal contact. With the raising, I want to do the opposite. I want to have a little bit of a gap under here, because when I have a little bit of a gap, I think the best way I can describe it, if you guys can see here with my finger, if I hammer right here, I wouldn't want to hammer my finger because I think that would hurt, but if I was right here, yes, broken finger, I could hammer right here, and then that part of my finger would move. And then I would have to do that the whole entire way around. So then that next pass around, that's moved, and I come down a little bit more, and then that gets hammered down. And if my finger was a little bit longer, it would keep going.
I understand. That's a really good description.
So,
Thanks.
and that's something that's really hard to see. When I'm working, and when I was first doing this, I had a really hard time grasping the idea, because it's not like I could sit on the inside of this and watch someone work. So it's really a lot about feel and sound. You'll hear here there's not going to be as much of a loud ping as there's going to be more of kind of a thud.
Okay.
It is loud, but it's kind of a different sound.
Okay.
So I'll show you guys that here. Let's see where it's fine. And you can hear that thud there. That's what I'm looking for. And then I hit myself right here on the headphone.
The dangers of being an artist.
Yeah, I have come back once and cracked myself in the cheek before. That's not ever that much fun, but.
And you can definitely see the difference. I mean, there's a real indentation that's happening here that's really pushing it into a different shape.
Exactly, and you can kind of see the form building, and it's...
Yeah, we turn it this way just a little bit. You'll begin to see how it's really beginning to go in and the form's taking shape. Very cool.
Yeah, and I think one difference between, working this way instead of with that hammer is this hammer really kind of roughs the shape out, whereas the planishing hammer kind of is what goes in and smooths everything and refines everything. I think that's with everything. Everything needs a little refinement. So, all right.
And it really is about position, where you've put this piece of metal onto the stake, because the fact that I can, from my perspective as I look at it, I can really see the shape taking place because of exactly where you've placed it on the stake.
Yeah, and a lot of every piece is a little bit different depending on the form. Some pieces are a little bit easy, where I can just kind of lean it against the stake. This one's a little bit more tricky because I'm having to hold it up a little bit. So really my left hand is doing just as much work as my right. Also, if I don't hammer this correctly, I'm going to get a lot of vibration in this piece, which then I'm going to feel it in my left hand. I used to have to wear gloves a lot because I wasn't that good at doing it, and I was getting a lot of feedback. But as I've been doing this for quite a few years, I've gotten a little bit better at it.
Now, how do you determine the form? Is the form something you've decided before you begin the piece, or does the metal kind of create the form as you go?
I really think every I'll take these off. I really think every piece, you know, is a little bit different. Every size piece of copper that you work with moves a little bit different. I bounce around from 17 to 18 gauge copper. I know that doesn't sound like much, but 18 gauge is a little bit more plastic and I can do a little bit more with it. 17 gauge is a little bit more rigid where I can't move it as much. But I kind of work intuitively and kind of see where the form's going. I have a general idea, but I'm never like kind of set specific on one particular form when I'm working this way. So.
Very cool. Continue to do some work.
Cool.
Magnificat, let's go to you guys. Do you all have a question right now for Hunter?
Were the two pieces of metal the same size? And also, do you have a flat piece so we can see the progression?
Oh,
that's a great question.
That is a great question. So this is one that I was working on. This was a 7.5 by 7, or it was a 7.5 by 7.5 square, and then I cut a circle out of it. This one was, I believe, I'm trying to think back because I've been working on this one for a while. I believe this one was 18 by 18. So these are much different, and you can even see in the scale there. You know, even on top, you can see a difference there. I wouldn't be able to do as much with this. I think with that question you're asking, does the hammering process stretch the metal out, and does it thin it? And I would say yes and no. You do a little bit of stretching with the metal, but you also do a lot of compressing at the same time. So I'm stretching the metal when I'm raising, but I'm compressing it back in when I'm planishing. You can get a little bit more, you know, out of your metal towards the end, and these edges also thicken up a bit. But yeah, by no means were these the two, you know, different shapes. And that's something I've learned over time also. If I have a particular form in mind, what size disc do I need to start with? And that's something that I don't really have a mathematical equation for yet, but it's just something visually I kind of approach.
Well, and that goes well with an email question we just got about how much you plan the piece in advance versus how much creates as it just happens.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, I really start with the form first when I'm making the piece because I like it to be this very intuitive process. I like to move the metal, like to see what kind of shape I get. After I have the form finished is really then when I go home, you know, listen to some music at night and I start to work on my sketches and be a little more specific. But then in that, I have these sketches and then they get skewed and they get manipulated, you know, when I actually start working with the material. And I think everyone, no matter what material they find that they're working with, and even in life, you know, your plans end up changing a little bit. So I kind of just let those changes happen.
Very cool. And you had asked for a flat piece. This is a very small flat piece of copper. But if you guys can imagine that this flat piece of copper was actually 18 inches by 18 inches, it's amazing to think that something was so straight and rigid looking becomes this form shape over time. What else would you like us to know about raising and hammering before we switch gears and go to a little bit of fabrication?
Trying to think if there's anything else. There's a lot of hammering.
There's a lot of hammering involved with that.
You know, and it's like I'm loud, and you know, that's one thing that I guess, you know, Craft Alliance has provided for me is a space where I can be loud. I feel like I have the requirements as like a drummer or a musician. You know, I am noisy. But yeah, I think that's about it.
Well, let's see if we've got some other questions from student groups just on this topic. Magnificat, I'll go back to you guys. Another question about the hammering and raising technique?
Okay, can you show us like a piece that's like kind of flat, but like in progression of like the hammering?
Do we have a flat piece of copper? We'll look for that as
that like has started to
hammer. We'll look for that, and while we look for that, I'll go to Durand Middle School in Wisconsin. Durand, do you guys have a question right now about this process of raising?
Not really, but it's about the overall business.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Have any of your creations not turned out as you wanted them to?
Yes. Yeah. I think there's a lot of, you know, pieces that I've made that haven't turned out the way I wanted. Especially when I was in school, I was experimenting with a lot of, you know, different ways of working. And when I was in school, I really wanted to learn how to raise like these vessels. So I spent all my free time in my metals class raising, and then I was also working on jewelry projects at the same time. Along with that, I ended up having all of these vessels that were raised and finished, and I had no idea what to do with them. because they had taken so much time, you know, to create. I didn't want to like start working on something and then completely mess it up. But at one point in time, I just kind of told myself like, you know, you spend a lot of time on this, but you have to invest more. And if you mess it up, you mess it up. And yeah, there were countless pieces that, you know, didn't, you know, turn out the way I wanted to. But, you know, in that, I think you have to work through that. You're always going to be making work that I think you're not completely happy with. But I think if you push through that, you'll find that you'll end up start making that work, you know, that's appropriate and that you do enjoy. So.
Very cool. In Magnificat, we have found a piece of flat copper. You ask, and we have. So you want to just give us an idea about the very beginnings of the piece, as the copper piece, as it begins to work?
Yeah.
Do you need a different stake, or will one of these work okay for you?
No. I mean, one thing I do
is,
I don't know if I have my ruler in here with me, but I can pretty much try to eyeball it for you guys. But what I like to do, I know that this edge here is 6 inches long here. And I'm just going to try to eyeball it here. Let's see how well. I guess all I have to do is split this in half.
Oh, fear not. We also
there we
have
go.
a
We have a
ruler
ruler
available in a pinch.
All right, so let's see. I wasn't too far off.
Over time, I would think you would just get a sense of this is 6 inches, this is 12 inches.
Yeah, I think you definitely get a, you know, a sense for that. So one thing you can see here, I have a 6-inch piece here. And what I'll end up doing, really kind of simple planning. You know, you make a square, you find your center. And then take a little scribe just like this here. Find my center point.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And we're going to have a round shape.
Yeah, so I can cut this out really quick if you guys would like to see that, which I can just step over here.
Sure, we'll move. Actually, no, don't worry about that at this point. So what would happen next? So what would happen next would be that you'll cut this out.
Yep.
And then this round part that I'm seeing here in my hands would then end up being over this
Correct.
or over that.
Well, what I'll do is I'll start working, you know, I'll sink it just like I had sunk this piece here in the sandbag.
Uh-huh.
And then this piece will come over the top. And then I'll come with another hammer, which I can show them that really
Okay,
quickly.
oh, that'd be cool, okay.
So this is a nylon hammer. It's a plastic hammer. And basically it doesn't mar the metal. More of the metal kind of beats up the hammer more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like I have a little bit of crack in that one. But I'll show you how I end up, you know, making that initial form and sinking it. So I'll start from the outside edges here, and I'm going to hammer like this. And that really helps kind of pull that metal over that stake.
And you're not seeking perfect hammer strikes, you're just seeking to shape the metal because you're going to, you know, obviously do more finishing work later.
Yeah, it's just kind of like roughing the shape out a bit and getting some type of little dome started so then I can start working over you know, the stake. And then I'll start working a little bit more into the interior.
And it begins to take shape really quite quickly.
Somewhat.
Well, eventually it'll be the shape you want it to be.
Yeah. So one thing with that also is I would probably be happy with this a little bit. I'd probably work a little bit more on it. But this is so stiff right now, this metal. So each pass that I make on these vessels, I have to come over the torch and anneal the metal. And what annealing is heating the metal up to around 850, 900, and that softens the metal back. And then I can work the metal again. And then after so much hammering on it, it'll become so stiff and it just won't want to move. just like this is now.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, then I'll have to go anneal it again.
Very
so there's
cool.
countless rounds of going back, annealing the metal with the torch, hammering, annealing, hammering, and repeat.
And repeat. Very good. Magnificat. Thank you very much for that question. That's a great demonstration to see. Well, let's switch to fabrication, because I know you want to talk a little bit about how you parts together, so to speak, that are going to be attached to the body and soldering and things. So what would you like to do? How would you like to start that process?
Yeah, so one thing, I'm going to throw this hammer over here. One thing I want to do now, I want to show you guys, because a lot of the work that I've been making lately are lidded jars. So I have to come in here on these forms and cut these shapes out so I can fit certain parts in there also.
So this actually now is something that was a bigger piece of metal that now is amazingly curved and smoothed. Yep. And what you're going to do is create another hole in it so that a piece could fit inside.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so on this one, here's my little top to it. And then it would eventually have something along this realm, but that's a little bit larger. And I want to make sure that there's not much height here, so I want to make sure this piece can slide in here smoothly, and I got to cut a hole out because of that. So
let's go for it.
And then I'm going to show you guys how I do that.
Okay.
Grab this little tool out.
And just as a time check, so you know we're about 27 minutes in.
Okay, sounds good. So what I like to do is I kind of like to eyeball it. I'm not really the most specific when it comes to measurements. I think visually, you know, that's how I kind of work. If everything looks pretty level.
Well, obviously, people aren't going to measure it when they actually see it as a finished piece. So if it looks good visually or interesting visually, it must be working.
I hope so. Yeah. So I'll just come in here and mark, you know, where these things are at. Okay. I'll get this kind of spinning a little bit.
Now, as you work on that, we got an email question that came in about your tools and supplies. I mean, is this all stuff that you've just accumulated over time?
It is, yeah. A lot of this I've been collecting since I started school. We would always have visiting artists come in, and they would talk about how, you know, you need to start collecting now because there's no way that you can afford buying all of it, nor do you know what you're going to need in 10 years. So I think if you slowly, okay, well, I need a file, I need a hammer, you know, I need a saw blade. Okay, so let's get those. And like, well, I want to do this, so then I need this tool. So then you buy the next tool. It's kind of, you know, as you go along. All right.
I'll let you start cutting.
So I think I'm pretty happy with, you know, this right here. I didn't really get this line completely accurate, but I'm going to cut out this little hole here. So one thing that I need to do now is I need to drill a little hole in there so I can get a saw blade in there.
Okay. And Durand and Magnificat, we're going to be coming back to you guys for questions again, so be thinking about what it is you want to ask after we go through this process here and we see how this gets created, and then we're going to be looking at how you attach parts together on the piece.
So here I'm just putting a little center punch in there, and that's just giving me a place to put that drill in. So I can now move this guy. And I think this is a good drill bit.
We're about to find out.
Oh, yeah. And one thing with drilling, you want to drill slow. If you drill fast, it dulls the bit and heats the metal up. So you can see there, I have a little bit of hole right there. And this is actually, I'm actually quite excited about showing you guys this because there's the neatest sound that happens when I cut holes out of the top of these vessels. And I'm usually always in my studio working by myself when I do this. So you guys will actually get to experience that sound. So this is a jeweler's frame. There's a little saw blade on here. It has little teeth on it. It's smooth when I bring my hand down, but it's rough when I take my hand up. So that means it cuts on the downstroke and smooth going back up. So in that, I have to string the vessel through here.
And then you'll connect the...
Yeah, and this is always a little tricky.
Then you connect the blade to the other side.
Yep.
Okay.
So in the blade, there's two little kind of clasp here that
Uh-huh.
sink that blade in. So then... And also, you know, I have to be a little delicate because I don't want to come all the way down and dent that piece of metal. So there's also a little bit of finesse here.
And as I provide color commentary here, you're doing a phenomenal job of staying right on the line. Very nicely done, Mr. Creel. Very cool.
I try to.
Well, it looks like you're about, what, halfway around now the circle?
Getting there.
Getting there. And what I notice is you're very, I mean, you're not trying to go too fast. You're just letting the blade move the metal the way the blade's supposed to move the metal. You're not forcing it at all. You're just letting the natural process, so to speak, of that friction work to your advantage.
Yeah, you really have to let the blade do the work. If you don't let, you know, if you don't let the blade or the tool do what it needs to do, the blade's just going to snap. And here's that sound. I always think it's like an airplane landing.
I was about to say, it is very much like a jet landing, and it seems to increase the closer you get to actually being done. Higher pitch now.
Yeah, and it echoes on the interior of it,
Uh-huh.
what I think projects.
Very close to having it all the way around now. And we're going to just, I assume, just drop through the center in a moment.
Oh. Yep.
Da-dum. Very cool. Magnificat, I'm going to go back to you guys for a question about this process. Go ahead,
Okay.
Magnificat.
Do you sell your stuff, or do you have like people that come to you to ask for individual things that you make?
A little bit of both. I'm always trying to sell work. I think that's always the goal, but that's not always the case. But recently, it was kind of a mutual thing. I approached a climbing gym, and they're having a climbing competition this past weekend, and I made the trophies for the climbing competition. So, you know, in that it was a nice little trade-off. I didn't get paid for the trophies, but we did exchange a free membership to the climbing gym for that. So yeah, I'm always open to commission pieces, and if people are interested in me making something specific for them, I would be happy to do that. Predominantly, I like to make, you know, I'm always making things, you know, that I kind of have in my head, and you know what I'm wanting to put out into the world. And yes, the goal is always to sell those and make a little bit of money.
Thanks, Magnificat. What's the next step here?
Next step, so.
Luckily enough, we have another piece.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you,
cut
Julia
this guy
Child.
out, and normally we would go in and file this guy out a little bit, and we'd still have a chance to do that. But I have this piece pretty much ready to go. Here I have this guy filed here, and the next thing that I want to do is, which you guys have seen a little bit of my work, usually they have this little base plate here. So in that, I want to, basically, I'm going to start attaching parts and start building on the metal. So I have this flat disc, I have this little vessel with a hole cut out, and the reason why I cut the hole out first is because when I attach this, there's no way I'm going to be able to cut that out. So a lot of stuff, you know, also with metalsmithing and, you know, building from scratch, there's a lot of problem solving. There's a lot of, you know, what step do I do first? You know, what can be accomplished first that I can't accomplish after I do something? So I'm constantly thinking about that also. So,
Okay. Well, let's attach.
yeah, so I'm going to show you guys how to solder. We're going to move over to the torches
We'll
a
move
little
to the
bit,
torch area.
and I'll show you guys that. So what I have in my hand here is flux. What flux is it allows silver solder to well, no, that's not what it does. What it allows, it keeps metal clean up to high temperatures. Solder is what we're about to solder these two together. It's like a jewelry technique. And what we're trying to do is connect the two pieces of metal. When you apply heat and fire to metal, it's going to oxidize. But what the flux is going to do is it's going to keep the metal clean. And the solder needs to have a clean surface to attach to before we do that. So this is kind of a medium that we put on that allows us to attach the metal through soldering, if that makes sense.
It actually does make sense.
All right. So, and with solder, you don't have to, put a lot on there. It's just a really thin coat. If you put too much on there, it kind of globs up a little bit. So, just something simple like that. This piece here I had in mind, I'm going to offset it a little bit. I'm going to have a little bit more room here. I already have a little bit of solder cut up here. And then we're going to see how well I solder here.
So students, you can have a chance to evaluate his ability to solder successfully.
Hey, you guys can tell me if I'm any good at it or not. So right now I'm going around in these smaller pieces and applying these bits of solder. I don't have to go, each piece right next to each other. They do a really good job of expanding when the torches get going and when I get the metal up to temperature. So one thing with soldering is I'm not trying to heat up the solder. What I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to heat up the two pieces of metal to a specific temperature in which those pieces of solder can flow between the two.
Ah, okay.
So there's a nice little handy chart here. We're using hard solder, so I have to get both pieces of metal at 1400 degrees basically for them to connect. If I get the top piece at 1400 before I get the lower piece, the solder is going to jump to the heat.
Oh.
If the bottom plate is hotter, the solder is going to jump to the bottom. So the solder is always going to go where the heat is. So I have to get both pieces of metal up to the same temperature at the same time. So I'll move this guy over a bit. So I'm going to start out with one torch, and then I'm going to bring in another also.
And does the size of the torch matter? Like you're using or a size of flame matter as you
I'm
begin?
using acetylene, air. The size of your flame is really determined by your torch tip.
Okay.
So that's just going to allow more gas to come through the tip here. If I was working on something bigger, I'd probably go to a larger torch tip. This is relatively small. So I can use one at the beginning, and then I'll bring two in.
Okay.
The reason why I want to use one at the beginning is because if I heat up the flux and the solder too quickly, the solder is just going to jump everywhere. It's going to bounce off because there's a chemical change that happens with the solder. And you guys will start to see that, and I'll explain that as that goes along. So something along with that too, I always start heating this bottom plate first when I'm making these guys, especially because that bottom plate piece of copper is much thicker than this here. It's also easier to heat this up than it is that bottom plate. So if I can get this brick to start to hold some heat, it's going to constantly heat that bottom piece for me. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but the solder starts to kind of bubble a little bit. It's kind of already done that. So I can now see my solder is pretty much going to stay in place. So I'm going to come in here with two torches now.
Well, Hunter, just continue to do your thing. This is fascinating as we watch it, as we see, because you guys are going to notice as the piece changes its temperature, you're going to see the copper change its color. Different things are going to happen to the metal as the copper gets heated up as well. This is an extraordinary opportunity for you guys to see this process's work as we share with classrooms across the country and our general viewing audience what it's like to create a piece of metal work like this from scratch.
And you guys can also see I'm predominantly trying to keep the heat on that bottom plate because I know that's the hardest one to heat up. And this is where I wish I had 3 or 4 arms. Because what I would like to do is be able to just be here, going around it. But I also need the metal to be able to spin so I can heat it all up consistently.
Hunter, are you comfortable answering a question from the kids while you do this?
Yeah.
Durand Middle School, let's go up to you guys. Do you have another question for Mr. Creel about the soldering process or what's going on today?
Do you smooth your metal pieces, and what materials do you put over the metal to make it change colors?
Oh, very cool. They're actually moving forward a little bit on us about the process of smoothing the metals. So after this gets done, you're actually going to go through a process with you're going to file, sand, and smooth the metal down?
Yes. And I'll get right back to that question, but the solder is about to start flowing here.
That's great. Do what you need to do, and we'll come right back to it, Durand.
Got my lines all crisscrossed here, but
I mean, this is fascinating just for our general viewing audience as well as the students to see the process at work. And this is obviously in real time, so we have a sense of what it takes now to actually adhere these two pieces together with solder and get it to the point where they're heated up together to that 1425
and
degrees.
here it goes. You guys can start to really see it here. And you can kind of see it start to melting.
Oh, you can really see it melting now.
All right.
Whoo, pop.
Yes.
And it just creates a really nice flow, and now they're together, but we're not going to touch it because it's going to be rather hot.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really hot. But one thing I'll do is I'll just kind of pick this guy up here and drop him in that bucket of water there.
Well,
Water's a little warm now. And now you can see, you can even try.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's not going anywhere.
No, it's not going anywhere, and surprisingly enough, my hand isn't burning either, which I'm very glad of. Thank you very much, Hunter. Very cool. Now, the student asked a question about the sanding and finishing that we were going to talk about right there, too. So after this gets done, you're actually going to go through a process. We're going to sand it down and finish it off to prepare it for what's going to be the coating.
Correct. Yeah, so we'll kind of go back to the bench for that.
Okay.
So we'll get this piece here. One way that really cleans the metal is you put it in the pickle. Mm-hmm. But I create a lot of like encapsulated forms, so they're completely enclosed, like this. So a lot of times I work on soldering these and I don't necessarily pickle them as I go.
And pickling means what, in case our audience doesn't know?
Pickling is like you're putting it in like a citric acid, which is cleaning off the oxidation off the metal. And this discoloration is the oxidation.
Okay.
This is a piece of copper that is completely clean. That has been pickled. Mm-hmm. So in that, all these forms are enclosed, and it's hard to, I have a small little hole here at the bottom, and it's hard to, get all that material out as you go. So I'll pickle the metal, I'll clean it all up, I'll have to heat it back up to kind of get the liquid to pressurize out. Mm-hmm. After I do that, I'll do a couple baths of soaking the piece in baking soda and water. And that also neutralizes the pickle and cleans it all out. Pickle basically eats away oxidation. It also eats away metal over time. So if you leave pickle in particular pieces, over time it will corrode. So you have to do a couple different baths of baking soda and water to make sure to clean that out. So yeah, this one's pretty much gone through that, and I'll show you guys a little bit about cleaning all this up.
Okay, great. We'll go for that. And just so you know, we got about 12 minutes
That'll be perfect.
Perfect.
So this piece here, I did a really, really good job of soldering. I can't believe I did that while I'm being filmed, but I did. This one here, when I was on my own working, I didn't do a very good job, so I had a lot of the solder pop up and kind of expand, and that's not really what the type of aesthetic I'm looking for. I'm looking for something really clean, really polished. So I'll move on to that.
All right, let's clean and polish. And Magnificat, I'm going to come to you guys for another question in just a minute as he begins to do this process. So think about something else you want to ask. And don't forget, folks, if you're joining us, it's live at HEC-TV.org that you can send us your email questions to.
So, where's my file at? Here we go. This bench pen's nice because I can really prop things up if I need to. And I can come in here. This piece particularly, I'll probably work here on my sandbag. I use this sandbag quite a bit. It's nice and portable. And it's also not that abrasive also. So here's another, very thrilling process. And it, but it's also something that needs to be done. I think there's a lot of times when you're making stuff that you really got to focus on the detailed work.
But you can really begin to see the shininess, so to speak, come back to it because you're getting rid of that oxidation.
Yep. And, and the solder, I like to kind of file away. And you can see here, like I'm doing a lot with my right hand, but in all reality, I think my left hand is a little bit more important in the studio for me because it's really what braces the metal for me.
As you do this, Magnificat, I'll go back to you guys in Ohio. Do you have another question for Mr. Creel? Go right ahead.
What are you making, and has your beard ever caught on fire?
I'm so glad one of you decided to ask that question. How can we do this program and not talk about beard and hair and potential singeing?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever caught it on fire. I haven't, recalled. I once, quite a few years ago, my hair was a lot longer, and it was down to about mid-chest, and I did catch my hair on fire every so often. But, the beard will probably catch fire eventually, so.
That's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Durand, let me go back to you guys, because I know you had a question about the amount of time it takes, so go for it, Durand. What's your question?
How long does it take you to start and then finish a work?
That's a really interesting question because we're seeing a lot of it in different pieces today. But if you were to actually be able to stand and do the work straightforward, so to speak, and never take a break and like leave a piece for a couple of days and come back to it, what is generally speaking the amount of time for you to put something together?
That's a really good question. If I was to completely work through something without taking a break, if I could physically do that, probably about anywhere from like, I would say like a rough estimate of like 30 to 36 hours for the medium-sized pieces. The larger ones take much longer. The small ones I can get done. And Tim, could you grab one of the smaller ones over there?
Why, certainly.
Tim? The smaller ones I can whip through, really quickly. So here's like a little small one. And I finished this one in a day. I raised it, cut everything out, and that's probably about 8 hours worth of work there. As the pieces get larger, they take more and more time through hammering and fabrication, the more parts that I have to cut out.
Now, in addition to filing, you're going to do something else here to kind of like polish or sand it or something?
Yeah, I'll show you guys another little step in the process. This is basically what cleans. This is basically just an abrasive little wheel. And I hope I answered your question with the time frame. But yeah, I mean, they can take anywhere from 8 to probably 48. I've probably had one that takes 50.
Okay.
They do take a long time to make. So yeah, and one thing with the time is I am getting a little bit better as I work through these, and I'm getting a little bit quicker, as they go along. So one thing, this is a really great thing to, clean these wheels or clean the metal up really quickly. So you can see there's quite a bit of a dramatic change there on that top surface.
Yeah,
there
there's
is
quite a
here.
bit of a dramatic change.
Yeah, and it goes pretty quick. And then, moving on, I have like all these little parts.
These are great, because they really begin to take on a personality as you see the parts come together.
Yeah, so you can see a lot of these are flat sheets of metal that have been put together, tubing, wire, things like that.
Uh-huh.
You can really start to build these, really like through using basic shapes, you can really create a lot of personality and character with these also.
Right, because you're just talking about geometry here. I've got
Yeah.
triangles and squares and all that kind of good stuff, and I've got round objects, but they really do take on a life of their own. He's like a little creature.
Yeah, I feel like they all have like the ability where they could just like trot off a little bit
Uh-huh.
away, or maybe I gotta wind him up and then he can start moving. Here's something a little bit larger. This guy took he took quite a bit of time to end up making. I ended up cutting slits in the top here, attaching these parts, cutting the legs.
And it may not be possible for you to do it, so this is a question you can't answer. Do you remember this guy? Does he look like what you originally envisioned? Did he change a little bit over time? Was there morphing?
Yeah, I think there was. And I think the question is, do you have things that don't turn out the way you want them to?
Uh-huh.
This guy actually changed because of that. I had actually in mind these little geometric, like little diamond shapes that I made. These are all hollow too. I had in mind to have 3 of these guys attached here. One thing you do when you enclose a form, if you don't create a hole in the form to let the air escape, they'll blow up.
Oh.
So one of them I was soldering a post on to get ready to attach, and the piece actually blew up on me. And it didn't hit me or anything, but it just went flying across the room. If it would have fallen into my beard, it would have caught fire. But
that would have made Magnificat happy.
so that's one thing too. It's like there's also small little parts that you work on through the process that don't turn out. And I just put that to the side and I changed my idea a little bit and went with it. So
Very cool. We're going to let you guys see a finished piece in a minute, but I want to go back to our 2 student groups to see you guys have a final question each. Magnificat, a final question from you guys?
How do you name your sculptures that you make? Or do you name them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't ever really have a name per se picked out as I'm making them. And when I finish this piece, and even there's a green piece over here that I have a name. I actually I haven't named this guy yet. I haven't really come up with something, and that's something that takes me a little while. When looking at the piece and viewing it and see how, I feel like he could move, how the lids work, how all that works for me, then I end up naming it. But as you guys are probably, getting the sense of that, these are all, very much character-based and toy-based. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're toys, but
Now, as we look at this finished piece, Ashton sent us an email question, thanks Ashton, just about the finished coating. We've got all this, what someone might say, beautiful copper here.
Yeah.
What's the decision you make in terms of creating the paint, the color at the end, and what is it that goes over the top of it to create this kind of coating?
So what I end up doing with these guys is called powder coat, and basically it is like a spray-on plastic paint. So it comes in a bag, it's powder. You get your piece cleaned up, you spray the powder on. The gun negatively charges or positively charges the powder. The piece is the opposite charge, so they attract. You put it in the oven for about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the powder coat, and it ends up melting.
Wow.
And then it creates that surface. So it's very much like spray paint. It just has a little bit of a different process to it. It's very durable. So if I mess up the powder coating on these, it's kind of a pain in the butt to take all of this off. And I can talk about this piece too, is I actually sent this one off to get powder coated, and it came back in the mail and it was dented. So then I had to refinish the whole thing and then get it and re-powder coat it also. So yeah, sometimes you completely get done with a piece and you think you're done and you're not. You got to revisit. I guess back to the question about how I name these. Eventually, one of these small guys that I'm working on is going to be, I think this is the guy I have. He's going to be his little sidekick character, so that whole Batman and Robin kind of aspect. And this one I always thought, when I was looking at this, I was really looking at the underwater, like submarine mines. So I thought this one was also neat because it also reminded me of like a plunger in a sense.
Oh, very cool.
That I could come and push this thing down and then it would blow up. It would, you know, thinking of it as being this like comical thing. So I thought of this one as being called like Big Plunge. So, you know, it's like a bigger like plunger bomb kind of thing. And I thought it was kind of really comical and funny, well, you know, how it looks. And then I'm going to have a little sidekick with it.
That's very cool. The pieces are just, personality is what I immediately saw. You guys can see lots more images of them on our website, HEC-TV.org, at craftalliance.org's website. And Hunter, you've got a website and an Instagram account and all that good stuff for folks to see your work too?
Yeah, it's on there. And the website will be up soon. It's going to be huntercreel.com. I'm just in the process of building it.
Very cool, very cool. But when you have the chance to come to the Craft Alliance website and see all the different work, and then we've also put up a really great video that you had done of describing how you create your work together. That's at HEC-TV.org. You guys can see. It's very cool for everybody to see all the personalities. We've just got about a minute left. Durand, Wisconsin, do you have a really quick question you'd like to ask?
How many pieces have you finished through your residency?
Oh, cool.
1, 2, 3.
The brain is working.
Yeah, I think 13 pieces I've made so far. I'm hoping to get around 15 to 16 different pieces.
Well, Hunter, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
sharing with us today. This has been very, very cool. Everybody, the archive of this program will be up on our website in just about a week. So you'll have the chance to see it and send your friends to it, because to see this process at work is just amazing. And there'll be a show the Craft Alliance will have of all the artists in residence when their residence is over in the early part of the summer. So if you're in the St. Louis area, you can see more of Hunter Creel's work. Thanks to everybody at Craft Alliance. Bye, everybody.